Okay, hello and welcome to another Sales Chat. My name is John Golden. Sales Chat is brought to you by Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP online sales magazine. Today I'm delighted to welcome Mari Anne Vanella, who is the CEO of the Vanella Group. And she is actually in Washington, D.C. today. Hey, Mari Anne, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here.
And also by my colleague, Nicole, who is further down in San Diego than I am, and she's going to be keeping the chat going and making sure that all the technology works well. For those of you who haven't been on a sales chat before, the format's pretty simple. We deal with one subject, kind of 3 or so questions, just a conversation around that subject. If you want to join in, all you need to do, go on Twitter, #SalesChats. That's #SalesChats. You can join in the conversation. Nicole will be looking after that feed, and if there's anything interesting pops up, she will interrupt us. Okay, so as I said, I have Mari Anne Vanella today, who's CEO of the Vanella Group, sought-after consultant. And what's
like
that?
Ice cream. It's vanilla like ice cream.
Yeah, vanilla like ice cream. Mari Anne's listed as the 40 most inspirational C-level leaders in sales management, and also one of the 20 women to watch in sales lead management, which is great because you're going to be watching her today. Yeah. And she is the author of the best-selling and award-winning book, 42 Rules of Cold Calling Executives, available from Amazon, and also will be available in the bookstore on SalesPOP. Okay, so with all that done, let's get into this conversation. Today we're going to talk about engagement breakdown. Now this isn't marriage advice. This is about sales, right? So let's start off with a simple definition here, Mari Anne. So what does engagement breakdown really mean?
You know, I invite everybody to go to the articles that I wrote on LinkedIn because I write a lot about this. And there's one that I wrote that it got over 78,000 reads. That was about, do your leads crash and burn on the front lines? And so companies go through a lot of work to identify prospects. And a lot of that is structured because they have systems. They have marketing automation or trade shows or whatever. You know, there's this systemized way of identifying prospects and a lot of visibility to what they're doing, and they're moving along. But then when they go out to the sales organization, it's kind of just this throw it out there. And if you have 10 different reps, you've got 10 different ways these things are being handled. And it's that very last stage when you've invested enough in that prospect for them to, make sense to have a conversation with them. That's the part where they go into this black hole of people making a bunch of independent decisions how to handle that. And so it's really interesting to, I just worked with a large Fortune 500 company to go back and investigate their path of identifying, we got people to sign up for a trial, nothing's happening, what's going on? And I found out what exactly was going on. And a lot of it was just engagement breakdowns. I would categorize it as that. And everybody has their own unique type of breakdown, but it's basically at what point does a relationship fall apart with a prospect? And there's a number of different reasons why that happens.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those reasons so that people can really identify with them. So what are some of the common reasons you see that this actually happens?
Some of it just has to do with the effort it takes to reach prospects. So yeah, my company does this for organizations, and we put tons of calls in to organizations. We put, I don't know, in some cases 10, 12, 15 plus attempts, and then we have a real deep dive conversation with them. But yet we still find that typical outreach is a few times and then on to the next thing. So giving up too easily is a big issue. Giving up too easily is a big issue, because I can't tell you how many times, we have some structure around if we engaged you with somebody and you haven't talked with them. So we spoke with them, everything was great, we give it to you. If you haven't spoken with them yet, and if you want us to help you, make sure you do all these things first, because for us to call them again, we don't want to be pesky and keep calling them and handing them off to somebody else, right? So before we put them through that again, not that it's a bad experience, they love talking to us, but it's, again, we got to hand it back over, right? And so to avoid that extra call in the loop, do all these things. So every single time when we get something back, we call them up, they're there. Right. And it happens all the time. And a lot of it is just that level of effort wasn't put in, or they sent an email, with too much information. That's another thing, is over-informing them. So rather than using the email, that email bridge to, here's this, here's a bridge, there's the imprint of the name, here's this, now we'll have a conversation, save it for the call when you can control it. They kind of throw up all this information in an email that's like 2 pages long, and they'll even like cut and paste stuff, and it looks like some ransom note or something, and then they send it to them, and they lose it, right? And they're like, I always say the first time somebody reads something they don't understand, you start losing them. Right. And then it just gets worse from there. So less is more on early email stuff.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because there's a lot of technologies now, and it's obviously very easy to not just attach documents, but to embed videos and to put a ton of information into an email. And there's tools that you can use to create that for you. But what you're saying is that that can be extremely counterproductive early in the engagement process.
Yeah, because if you over-inform somebody, like let's say somebody has a very specific interest, because a lot of times they have a very specific topic or an area that you're able to address, and all the other stuff doesn't matter. If you go in, I'll give you an example after this of a demo I had once, but if you go in and give them all this functionality, they're like, nah, I wasn't really looking for that. But if you just follow up with we understand you want this, we can totally help you with that, we work with boom, 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 a few bullets, let's talk about it. Then you get into a live conversation. A lot of breakdown happens in these email threads of, well, they're not interested. Well, from the email, it doesn't look like they were interested. It's like, who listens to an email? It's like, save that stuff for live conversations where you can really understand what's going on.
Yeah, because I think that also falls in with the concept of argument dilution, which a lot of people fall into that trap, where you come with a compelling argument, but then you decide to add like 4 or 5 others. And instead of reinforcing, you're actually diluting at that stage.
Exactly.
So after a prospect is identified, can you give us some idea, what is some of the first things that a salesperson should do to keep that prospect engaged?
Really is to keep the prospect talking, because I get the interesting thing is my company does this, as that's what we do, but I'm also a CEO that everybody wants to sell stuff to. Sure. So I get a lot of outreach from sales reps, like all the sales engagement platforms, all, everything from networking to financials, all the stuff, right? So I get lots of sales reps contacting me, and it's usually a lot of talking, and it's a lot of pushing information, where really you want to say almost nothing and let your understanding and your expertise be demonstrated through what you're asking. Right. So that's more important than, well, we do this and we do that, and we want to talk to you about how we've been able to do this. I've seen presentations where the first part of the presentation is all about the rep. Well, I do this and I manage that and I have accounts like, it's like, who cares, right? And it's really talk about, we know that companies like you deal with stuff like this. So we figure because you're in this industry, you're probably dealing with stuff like that. Is that true? Like what kind of stuff, what kind of things are you dealing with? And get them talking to you so that you can say, and then what direction to take with it, rather than throwing all this stuff out there and hoping they bite on something. Because prospects, I do notice that people have a lot more attention you know, it's like ADD for a,
Yeah,
for lack of a better word, but I mean, their attention span is much more reduced than it was years ago, because they have so much of it now. They have so much sales outreach. It's like they can't take a lot.
Yeah, I read a couple of years ago, and I don't think that it was actually true, but I mean, it was a fun fact that our attention span had gone from like 15 seconds down to 5 seconds or something, and a goldfish is 8 seconds. So we'd actually gone below the goldfish. So I thought, yes, okay, so we're now into the de-evolution phase now, where we are going backwards. But then I wrote a piece called, you know, Selling to Goldfish, and to your point is, you know, people's attention spans are so limited now. We're so distracted. You know, when you're talking to somebody on the phone or whatever, you don't know what else they're doing. So you have to hit them with something that resonates really quickly. And I think that's the key point. So how does a salesperson teach themselves to be disciplined like that and focus on things that will resonate with the prospect?
Well, like that one point that I wrote on your guys' blog about having a script, that's important, because there's so, I mean, really all of us, how many times have we hung up the phone and said, oh, I forgot to ask them about this, right? And if you have all of that detailed out in front of you, you'll know you won't have stuff like that happen. So that's one thing, is to organize your workspace and make sure that while you have them on the phone, to keep the dialogue going. And if you go over here and talk about this, that's okay. Steer it back over there. Document it. So from a management standpoint, you know, one of the problems that a lot of sales managers have is they don't know what happened because nobody wrote it down. So leveraging your CRM to have your to have a record of what you're doing, because a lot of people in good faith, they think, oh, I'd never forget this conversation.
Sure.
Everybody forgets. So it's writing down what happened in a meaningful way, so that when you look at it again in a month or whatever, you're not going, I don't know what did I mean by that? So that's important. You know, and another thing too is when you're talking with prospects, and there's all these little nuances about it. And that's the thing of mastering a conversation that you can't see somebody, because you've got all these cues and nonverbal things when you talk, even like talking like this, you know, we can see what's going on. And if, but when you're on the phone, you are missing a lot of that. So really understanding that and paying attention. So being involved from your own perspective instead of thinking about yourself, think about the prospect. And, you know, just like if you're presenting to a team and you can kind of see if you're kind of losing somebody a little bit, and then you can kind of focus on what their concern was, the way that you take a read on that, instead of doing it visually, you do it verbally. So then you ask a question. So you gotta keep them talking so that you can come back with the right thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that you just touched on there just reminded me, when I ran Huthwaite some years ago and Spin Selling, one of the things that we used to teach organizations and salespeople was call planning, right? And it's such a simple idea. And at the time it was, you know, writing it down on call plan sheets or whatever. But it's one of the hardest things to get people to do. But we would see in organizations where people really adopted call planning and reinforced it and continued, they had much more success. So why is it, do you think, that that's still an issue, getting people to plan their calls in advance?
You know, some of it just comes from that same mindset of, what are you going to close? So there's this kind of hair on fire. Everybody's worried about what's going to close right now. But because of that, there's like this, you know, trail of dead leads behind them, because those ones weren't addressed. They're not doing anything here for 6 months. I'm not going to talk to them now. Oh, they're not doing anything, you know, so they're throwing all this stuff behind them and just focusing on the near term. And so everybody's kind of in this next 30 days mentality. And you've got to stop. I mean, that's the one thing it does. You've got to put a set of eyes on this stuff. whether you've got marketing automation or you've got a CRM or whatever you have, it's you need to look at it. So from an executive standpoint, because I'm always encouraging organizations to stop and look at what's going on. Look at what's going on between this system and that system and here, because like we're a Marketo partner, right? And a lot of times I'll work with somebody in a Marketo instance, and we can find 15% plus of active deals that are totally off their radar within that population. And that's because nobody's looking at it and they don't really know how to interpret certain things. And so they're kind of looking to automate a little too much. And by automating too much, you miss stuff.
Right.
So you have to look, somebody has to look at it and then structure it. So when it goes here, then you do this. And everybody needs to be doing the same kind of stuff. Like there's this term social selling now, which that's fine, I get it. But people have always been doing that. It's not a new skill set. It's just taking a real world mindset into a digital world mindset.
Yes.
So the reps that were doing well before, they were doing all that. They were researching people and looking at them and finding out, and then now you do that online because you're talking to them on the phone. It's the same thing. But a lot of people don't look up who they're talking to, so they miss a lot of opportunities that way. There's a lot. It's a pretty big topic when you think about it.
No, absolutely. And one of the other things, because you just touched on it there, one of the other things we were just talking about before we came on air is, we're a technology company, ourselves, Pipeline or CRM. But do you think that salespeople have almost become too reliant on technology, and they're always looking, now they're being bombarded with this new sales tool and that new sales tool, almost to the point where they start believing that they don't really have to do anything, that it can all be done for them? Is there a danger that we're falling into that trap?
Yeah, there is, because as companies buy more technology, the reps kind of just wait for stuff to get fed to them. But a lot of that, it's not their fault, because that's the expectation is follow up on this stuff when you get it. But I do think that a CRM is critical. So you've got to have that, and you've got to use it right. I always talk about putting the system to work for you. So a lot of companies a lot of reps feel like, I'm not going to share my information. I'm not going to give it away. I even had, I became aware of a situation where a rep I know was training other reps how to keep track of their stuff without it showing up as an opportunity or a pipeline, so that they didn't have to kind of be held to the mat on it. But I thought that's kind of like a management problem, right? That's not that, that they feel that they have to do that. So setting up an environment that you've got processes and some kind of governance about how it's used, but then adding a bunch of tools takes a lot of time. So like when I look at CRMs and setting them up for the team, a rep shouldn't have to spend more than 10 minutes documenting records. It shouldn't be that they have to click through 15 things to get a piece of information. So that's the thing to look at from a management standpoint, is how much time am I adding to their day by doing this stuff? Because a lot of these things you can find out on platforms you already have. And if you keep better records and you have a better data governance, data management process in your CRM, you don't need a lot of that other stuff. So it is, I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but it's, I think marketing automation is awesome. I think having a contact database subscription is awesome. I think CRM is essential. But there's all these other tools that you can really do yourself.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And, that's obviously the focus of our CRM, is we made it visual, we made it easy for salespeople. We have email integrations, all of that, so you don't have to change what you're doing. But I totally agree with you, is that there's all these different tools constantly being thrown at people, and there's only so much you can use. And I think it starts to take away from the essence of what we're talking about, and that's the human hard work piece.
Right.
So let's move on a little bit. So if you can get through the initial engagement, right, what are some of the traps that you can fall into that the engagement breaks down maybe on the second call or the third call, before you even get too far into the sales process?
A lot of it is, again, transferring your activities and your mindset to that digital world, right? So in person, and even though companies have changed and systems and the management of all that has changed, the way sales operations operate is very slow to change. And a lot of people have a lot of old school approaches to a digital environment, and that is not as helpful. So for example, when you would meet, and I used to fly all over the country, I get it, I used to do that, and you would spend some time with prospects, but now that time converts to a call or a web event or something like that. And so you have to do different things. So I think one of the things that happens is too much time will pass. So you have to do things so instead of in-person meetings, or instead of something that creates more stickiness with those prospect accounts because you're in person, you have to transfer that to things that add a lot of value, that are smaller things. So more frequent bite-sized things.
Right.
I use a tool called Squareo, which is a really cool tool to integrate with CRMs. I don't know if you're integrated with them yet, Squareo, but they are a visual BI company that you can put, if you have it in your CRM, you don't have to have it in your CRM, but if you do, you open up a record and you've got this little carousel of current stuff about your accounts, and it's way more intuitive and in-depth than other stuff you would find. So you've got a lot of, it's interesting because it actually makes you want to look in your CRM and see what's going on in there. And so that's a thing, because you can use those data points. Hey, I saw you guys got this award. That's awesome. Hey, I saw that you are working on this. I ran across this article. I thought you'd be interested in it. So you have to have a much more proactive approach to building little bridges in communication, right? So you have this big first call with them. That's great. If you just let them sit there for 4 months and they have 150 other calls between then, and by the time you call them back, it might be fresh for you still. The prospects have even said, I didn't talk to you. They would say that to a rep because they don't even remember. So you have to make it memorable, and the way that you do that is through these little high value interactions, and sending them a white paper you ran across, an article you ran across, an idea you had, all these things that no expectation. Because just do it, because that is building a better relationship with them. So if you do it with an intention that is not genuine, then it's hard to maintain that. But if you really understand that you build better relationships that way, people reciprocate from that. So now you've got 4 months and all these little interactions in the meantime, and it's like, that's a cool thing,
Yeah. So to your point, those interactions have to be meaningful and genuine, rather than just I better fire something random off to this guy just so he knows I'm still alive. Yeah.
Or buy our stuff. Hey, is there anything going on I can talk about? Or I'm going to be in the area. I want to stop and see you. It's like, if you've done nothing to that, it's a lot harder to get a meeting than if you've been sending them stuff that is of value to them. Because it helps them do their jobs better.
So seeing as we're bumping up, we're at nearly 25 after the hour. Would you have some advice for people watching today? How can they look at their own organization and see whether they are exhibiting signs of major engagement breakdown? I mean, how can they find out whether that is them?
So one thing you can look at is if you have marketing automation, for example, you would look and say, okay, how many MQLs, SQLs, whatever it is, how many of those are coming over? How many go to the team? What happens to those? If you have any kind of measurement of how many meetings do we have versus how many deals do we get? Like, I know one company, they scheduled 600 meetings to close 30 deals. And I'm like, that's a lot. And all of it was because this stuff was like, if you visualize how it's falling apart as it's going to get to that last 30. And so look at what your output is, and then look at everything that went into that, and then say, okay, what's happening to all this stuff in between? And then get in there and find out what reps are doing, find out what happens to stuff, find out what happens to stuff when prospects aren't ready right now. You know, do they just go back into an email list and you send them more stuff? A lot of times when prospects go quiet, it's not because they're not interested, it's because they're talking to your competitors.
Right.
So, you know, you don't want to just assume that they're quiet for no reason. If you don't have marketing automation, you can still look at what are all the things that are happening here, what's our output, what fell apart, and then go in there and dissect it. So I've worked with a lot of companies doing that. They're really kind of surprised what they find out. And it makes a big difference when you fix that stuff.
Do you have any just examples? You don't name the companies, but just examples of companies you've worked with and how they turn things around?
Yes. So I had a company, this is a recent thing I did, and it was a Fortune 500 company, and they had a demo. They had a trial software, and they're like, we're downloading all these trials. Nobody's buying it. But what happened is, person would download a trial, they would just get an email, and it would just say, hey, this is great, da-da-da, you know, that was it. Then that would go into the queue of an inside person that would kind of keep track of it, and they would just send an email, let me know if you need anything. And then it would sit there, and then after 30 days, if nobody heard anything or nobody did anything, nobody would do anything. And I mean, it was really, I actually wrote an article about that, about trials and how they fall apart. And so what was happening is the person that was often doing the trial was not any kind of influencer in any way. So they're not somebody, it was a very technical piece of software. So that that person was usually an engineering person. So they're not going to go, we need to buy this. You know, they look at it and say, this was pretty cool. Yeah. Nice if they bought it. So what really needed to happen is when somebody downloaded this, they needed to engage with them right away and say, why'd you do it? What's going on? Are you guys looking to address what? Who's over this group? And then engage and say, hey, I know one of your engineers is running our stuff, is running our platform on a trial. I'd love to get the numbers in front of you after. Because there was this huge blind spot. Management didn't see the results of what the trial was internally. And because the engineer wasn't going and running and saying, hey, here's our stuff. You know, I mean, no, there was this huge just crash. And so that was a whole model of engagement and a structured and a managed trial and what happens where and how to find all this. And so that was a pretty cool project. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, in the last couple of minutes, one of the things that we like to ask our guests is, what's your power tip? How do you set yourself up every day? Is there one thing you do every day to set yourself up for success?
Yes, I spend time, at least 15 minutes every day, educating myself on my space, on technology, on things that help me stay very current and identify trends. And so just invest. You always have to invest in yourself. And I would say don't ever be too busy to keep a pulse on what's going on out there. That's really, really important.
No, I love that idea because, again, as we talked earlier, I mean, I don't think people invest enough time in themselves. And after all, if you don't invest in yourself, who's going to?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been fantastic. So, Mari Anne, can you tell people a little bit more about yourself, about what your company does and how they can contact you and find out more?
Yeah, thanks. So the Vanella Group, we've been around for it's almost 17 years, and we do outbound sales development for enterprise tech companies. So we're doing outbound, but very sophisticated outbound. So I recruit very senior level people. We go in and have real deep dive conversations with organizations and find out what they're buying, what their timing is. And then we identify those and manage them as they're going through the pipeline. So I had one client that I mentioned earlier that 80% of their large deals closed mapped to our program. So it's very effective. Companies have ran it for many years. They can, and then we do a lot of other stuff too. I do training like with SDRs and even direct reps, like how can they be more effective engaging with prospects and managing relationships in large territories. So you can find me on Twitter on @VanellaGroup. The site is vanellagroup.com. So yeah, I would love to engage with anybody and talk about it, or even just point you to some resources and stuff that would help you out. I know a lot of the different things that are pretty helpful in the industry, so I'm glad to refer people off to things and help them to improve their operation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, listen, thanks again. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we could obviously have talked a lot more about it, but we try to keep this to 30 minutes for our audience. So again, I want to thank you. This is John Golden from Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine, where you can see some of Mari Anne's articles there and posts as well and find out a little more about her. Her book will also be up in our bookstore later today. And thanks, Nicole, for keeping everything running smoothly. We will see you all again for another sales chat soon. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.